At the family dinner, my daughter-in-law called security. "Get this pauper away from the table," she said, her voice calm, almost casual, like she was ordering dessert. The room froze. For a second, even the jazz music from the hotel speakers seemed to stop. I looked around the long mahogany table, lined with crystal glasses and white roses. My son's friends, their wives, and a few distant relatives stared at their plates as if the pattern on the china had suddenly become fascinating. No one spoke, not even my son. The air smelled of roasted duck and expensive wine, but all I could taste was metal. The bitter tang of humiliation. The guard hesitated. He looked at me, then at her. He couldn't have been older than 25. His name tag said Evan. He didn't know he was about to become part of a family memory that would never be forgotten. "It's fine," I said quietly. Before he could move, I was just leaving. I stood up, smoothing my old navy blue dress, the same one I'd worn at my husband's retirement banquet 20 years ago. Back then, people had stood to clap for us. Tonight, they wouldn't even look me in the eye. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in one of the mirrors that lined the ballroom wall. Silver hair, thin frame, pearls at my neck, eyes steady. I didn't look poor, just invisible. "Wait, Mom," my son started. His voice low, uncertain, but his wife's hand found his arm. Her fingers painted a shade of red that looked expensive and cruel. "She's had enough wine," she said, smiling to the table. "It's better if she rests." Laughter followed, polite, forced, shallow. I walked out anyway. The corridor outside was silent except for the hum of air conditioning. The banquet doors closed behind me with a soft click, muffling the clinking glasses and laughter. I didn't cry. At 71, I'd learned that tears were for moments when there was still hope left. This wasn't one of them. The hotel hallway smelled faintly of lemon polish and fading perfume. My heels tapped against the marble, echoing too loudly in the emptiness. Every step felt like a farewell, to the family I thought I had. To the illusion of belonging. At the lobby, the concierge looked up from his desk, startled to see an elderly woman alone, holding her clutch like a lifeline. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" he asked. "Yes," I lied, offering him a small, practiced smile. "Just heading home." Outside, the night air was sharp, smelling of rain and car exhaust. I walked toward the parking lot, the city lights glittering like distant promises. It was supposed to be a celebration, a simple family dinner to honor my late husband's birthday. My daughter-in-law had organized everything, the menu, the guest list, even the seating arrangement. I'd thought it was a kind gesture. Now, I realized it was a performance, and I was the punchline. The insult hadn't come out of nowhere. It had been building for years. The way she interrupted me mid-sentence. The way she called me, dear, with that sweet poison smile. But tonight, she'd finally said out loud what she'd always thought, that I was beneath her. My son, James, once told me, "Mom, you worry too much. Clara means well." Clara meant everything well, for herself. I reached my car, sat down behind the wheel, and gripped the steering wheel until my hands stopped shaking. The streetlights painted long streaks across the windshield, and for a moment, I saw my husband's face reflected there, steady, kind, amused. "Oh, Robert," I whispered, "you'd have known exactly what to say." The truth was, they'd all forgotten who I used to be. Before the wrinkles, before the quiet dinners alone, before Clara married my son and took over every part of his life, there had been me. I was the woman who started Eldridge & Company, a small logistics company in Dallas. Back when women weren't expected to run anything more than a household. Robert and I built it from scratch, surviving recessions, late nights, and payroll crises. When he passed, I stepped back, let James and his wife take the reins. They told me it was time to rest. I let them believe I had. As I drove home, the city stretched ahead, glass towers, neon signs, people hurrying through the rain. I felt strangely calm, the kind of calm that comes right before a storm changes direction. When I pulled into my driveway, I turned off the engine and sat there for a long time. The house was dark except for the porch light, glowing soft and steady. Inside, everything smelled like lavender and old wood. The framed photos on the mantel looked back at me. Robert with his wide grin. James at his college graduation. Clara holding their baby. I stared at them for a long time before whispering to the empty room. They think I'm done, that I'm just an old woman with nothing left. Then I smiled. They have no idea who still signs their paychecks. The house was quiet when I got home that night. Too quiet. I hung my coat by the door and set my purse on the console table. The ticking of the old grandfather clock echoed through the living room, slow, steady, like it was counting down to something. I didn't turn on the TV or the radio. I just stood there, staring at the dining table set for one. The china plates I'd kept for special occasions were still spotless. It struck me then. I'd spent my entire life preparing tables for people who no longer had a seat for me. I poured myself a cup of tea. Chamomile, my husband's favorite. It had been years since anyone else had asked for that tea. As the steam rose, I thought about Clara's voice at the restaurant, sharp, confident, cruel. Get this pauper away from the table. The words replayed like a song stuck in my head. Pauper. I wasn't poor, not by any stretch, but she didn't mean money. She meant power. That word was never about what I had. It was about what she thought I didn't have anymore. The next morning, I woke early. The sun filtered through the lace curtains, painting golden patterns on the hardwood floor. I went through my usual routine, fed the cat, watered the plants, checked the mail, but my mind was elsewhere. My son hadn't called, not that I expected him to. He never called after awkward family moments. He'd always said, "Mom, you take things too personally." Too personally. As if being publicly humiliated by your daughter-in-law in front of 50 guests was just a misunderstanding. I smiled at the thought. A tight, humorless smile. In the kitchen, I sat down with my notebook, the one I'd used for years to track bills, grocery lists, and birthdays, but this time, I opened it to a clean page and wrote one line at the top. Things to remember. Underneath, I started a list. Who owns what? Who forgets who? Who needs a reminder? I thought about the company, Eldridge and Company. I hadn't stepped foot there in nearly 8 years. Not since I signed the papers giving James operational control. But ownership? That was never something I gave away. Robert and I had built that company from nothing. He used to say, always keep something in your name. Myrtle, people change, paper doesn't. That memory warmed me. He always knew how to protect me, even from things I couldn't imagine. I reached for my laptop and logged into my old email. The password still worked. The inbox was full of unread updates, annual reports, board meetings, dividend notices. My name was still listed in the header as founding partner. For the first time in years, I felt something awaken inside me, a quiet strength that had been sleeping under layers of politeness and grief. Later that afternoon, I sat in the garden with a notebook and my tea. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine. The wind rustled through the trees, scattering leaves across the patio like gold confetti. I thought about that night, about the way Clara's eyes had glinted when she called me a pauper. She wanted to humiliate me, to erase me from their picture-perfect life. But she'd forgotten one thing. You can't erase the person who built the frame. I closed the notebook and looked toward the sky. All right, Robert, I whispered, you once told me revenge isn't about anger. It's about teaching people what respect costs. The cat jumped onto my lap, purring softly. I stroked her fur and smiled. Lesson 1 begins tomorrow. That evening, I decided to cook dinner, just for myself. A small roast, potatoes, and the apple pie recipe Robert loved. The kitchen smelled warm again, like it used to when we were younger. While the roast browned in the oven, I sat by the phone. Still no call from James. I wasn't surprised. I imagined Clara telling him I'd overreacted, that she hadn't meant it that way. He'd believe her. He always did. It used to hurt, that blind loyalty he had for her. But now, it didn't sting the same way. It just clarified things. The son I raised was gone. replaced by a man too afraid to stand up to his wife. That wasn't my fault. And it wasn't my burden anymore. I took the pie out of the oven and placed it on the counter to cool. The smell of cinnamon filled the air. It reminded me that life could still feel warm, even when people didn't. As night fell, I walked into my husband's old study. His leather chair, his pen set, his framed certificate, all still there. On the desk sat a small brass plaque that read, "Integrity builds empires." I ran my fingers over the engraved letters. "You were right, Robert," I whispered, "and tomorrow, I'll remind them who built this one." The grandfather clock chimed 9 times. I turned off the light and left the room, feeling lighter than I had in years. Tomorrow, I would go back, not as the grieving widow or the forgotten mother, but as the woman who still signed their checks. I didn't sleep that night. The clock kept ticking, steady and loud, as if reminding me that morning was coming whether I wanted it or not. At sunrise, I put on a cream-colored blouse, pressed slacks, and my pearl earrings, the same pair Robert gave me on our 25th anniversary. I brushed my hair back, tied it neatly, and looked at myself in the mirror. For the first time in a long while, I didn't see a widow. I saw a woman who still had work to do. I poured my coffee, black and strong, and slid a few papers into my purse, old company documents, ownership certificates, and one small folder that still had my name printed at the top, Myrtle Eldridge, founding partner. By 8, I was driving downtown. Dallas morning traffic looked different when you hadn't driven it in years. Same skyline, same rush, but it all felt quieter, maybe because I was. The lobby of Eldridge & Company was still lined with marble floors and glass walls. Just as Robert designed it, the company logo gleamed behind the reception desk, brushed gold against black granite. A young woman at the front desk looked up as I entered. "Good morning, ma'am. Do you have an appointment?" I smiled. "No, dear, I built this building. I don't need one." She blinked, unsure whether to laugh or call security. But then an older man walked by, Henry, the head of accounting. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Mrs. Eldridge," he said softly. "I can't believe it. It's been years." "Good to see you, Henry," I said, shaking his hand. "How's the company been treating you?" He hesitated. "It's changed, ma'am, not the same since Mr. Robert passed." I nodded. "That's what I heard." We rode the elevator together to the executive floor. Everything looked sleeker, colder, new desks, glass partitions, no trace of warmth. Clara had turned a family business into a showroom for her ego. At the end of the hall, I saw her office door wide open. Her name gleamed on the glass, Clara Eldridge, Chief Operating Officer. She was on the phone, laughing, that high, polished laugh I'd learned to recognize as fake long ago. When she noticed me, her face froze, just for a second. Then came the smile. The one she saved for social media. "Well, if it isn't our family matriarch," she said. "What brings you here, mother?" "Business," I replied simply. Her brows lifted. "Business? I thought you were retired." "I was," I said, setting my purse on the desk. "Until last night reminded me I still have unfinished matters." She gestured toward the chair opposite her desk. "Please, sit." Her tone dripped with politeness, but her eyes were restless, calculating. I sat down, folded my hands neatly. "I came to remind you, Clara, that I'm still one of the company's owners. In fact, by share distribution, I still hold the final vote in leadership changes." She chuckled, leaning back. "That can't be right. James handles all that now." "I'm sure he believes that," I said, sliding the folder across the desk. "But beliefs don't change what's written in ink." Her laughter stopped. She opened the folder, scanned the first page, and went pale. "These are old documents," she whispered. "Legally binding ones," I corrected. For the first time since I'd entered the room, she had no words. The silence between us stretched long. I looked at the framed photos behind her, her posing with my son. Their children, charity events, award nights, all smiles, all staged. I leaned forward slightly. "I built this company, Clara, From a garage. Every desk, every paycheck, every opportunity came from the foundation Robert and I laid. You married into it. Don't mistake inheritance for creation. Her jaw tightened. What do you want? Respect, I said simply. And accountability. She scoffed. Is this about last night? I was joking. You're taking it too seriously. Public humiliation isn't a joke, I replied. But don't worry, I'm not angry. I'm practical. I pulled out a sealed envelope and placed it on her desk. This, I said, is a notice of personnel reassignment. Effective immediately. Her eyes darted to the paper. Then back to me. You're firing me? I smiled faintly. No, I'm promoting humility. You'll be reassigned to operations support. Specifically, maintenance and kitchen logistics. She blinked. You're sending me to the kitchen? I stood. You always said I didn't belong at the table. Clara, now neither do you. Henry stood in the doorway, holding the official company stamp. He'd been waiting for my signal. I nodded once. The thud of the stamp echoed through the office like a quiet gavel. Clara rose to her feet, her face white. You can't do this. I already have, I said. The board will be informed by noon. I turned toward the door. And Clara, don't bother calling security this time. They work for me. As I walked down the hall, employees glanced up from their desks. Some whispered, others smiled faintly. For the first time in years, the air in that building felt alive again. Not with fear, but with respect. I passed by the glass wall where the company's founding plaque still hung. It read, Integrity builds empires. Robert's words. Our legacy. I touched the brass letters and whispered, Empire restored. Then I left, heels tapping steady against the marble, the same sound I'd made the day we opened our doors 40 years ago. Only this time, it didn't echo loneliness. It echoed closure. When I walked out of that building, the sun was brighter than I remembered. It hit the glass towers around me, turning them into mirrors of light. People rushed by, coffee cups in hand, talking about meetings and deadlines, the same kind of rush Robert and I once lived for. I just stood there for a moment, breathing in the city air. It smelled of asphalt, ambition, and something else, freedom. I didn't feel proud. I didn't even feel victorious. I just felt balanced. Like the world had quietly realigned itself after years of tilting the wrong way. By the time I got home, the answering machine light was blinking. 3 messages. The first was from Henry, short and warm. Ma'am, just wanted to say thank you. Everyone in the office knows what really happened now. It means a lot. The second was from someone on the board, confirming my decision had already been registered and processed. The third was from James. His voice was low, shaky. Mom, what did you do? Clara came home in tears. She said you humiliated her in front of everyone. Please call me back. I didn't. Not that day. That night, I sat by the window, the city lights blinking in the distance. I thought about James, my only son. When he was a boy, he used to sit on Robert's lap, listening to business calls, pretending to take notes with a crayon. Back then, I thought he'd grow up to be strong, fair, maybe even wiser than his father. But somewhere along the way, he started choosing comfort over courage, peace over truth. And Clara knew it. I once believed protecting my son meant keeping the family calm, avoiding conflict, forgiving easily. Now I understood. Silence had only taught him that cruelty had no cost. The phone rang again around 10. Same number, same son. I let it ring. Instead, I opened my old photo album. The leather cover cracked softly in my hands. There we were, the 3 of us, standing in front of our first delivery truck. The Eldridge and Company logo still wet with paint. Robert's arm around my shoulder. James on my hip, both smiling like the world was small and kind. I ran my fingers over the picture and whispered, I wish you'd met the man your father wanted you to be. The clock chimed once. I closed the album. The next morning, I went to the local bakery, a small place on Main Street I'd been visiting for years. The girl behind the counter, Lily, Smiled when she saw me. Haven't seen you in a while, Mrs. Eldridge. I've been busy, I said, smiling back. She handed me my usual order, 2 croissants and a black coffee. Rough week? I laughed softly. You could say that, but sometimes, rough weeks remind us what we're made of. She nodded, though I don't think she understood. That was all right. Not everyone needs to understand. I sat by the window with my coffee. The morning sun spilled across the table, warming my hands. For the first time in months, I felt hungry. Alive. Around noon, James showed up at my house. He didn't knock, he still had a key. Mom, he said, standing in the doorway, we need to talk. I turned off the stove and faced him. I thought we already did. Years ago. He frowned. You went too far. Clarice devastated. You embarrassed her in front of the whole company. I kept my voice calm. She embarrassed me in front of an entire restaurant. That was a misunderstanding. No, James, I said quietly. It was a revelation. He looked at me then. Really looked. Maybe for the first time in years. I don't even recognize you anymore, he said. I smiled faintly. Then it's about time you met me. He didn't have much to say after that. He left without finishing his sentence, without closing the door properly. The silence that followed was heavier than before, but not unbearable. It was honest. Sometimes, peace isn't everyone sitting together at the table. Sometimes, peace is finally sitting alone, and not feeling small. That evening, I lit a single candle and placed it beside Robert's photo. The flame flickered, steady and soft. I did what you'd have done, I whispered, and I did it without raising my voice. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing through the chimes on the porch. For a moment, it felt like he was answering, not in words, but in the way the light steadied. I took a sip of tea, leaned back, and smiled. They'd learn. All of them. That kindness is a choice. And so is strength. It's strange how quiet victory feels. People think it comes with applause, with fireworks, with some grand sense of triumph. But real victory sounds like the click of a door closing behind the person who once looked down on you. The following week, the phone barely rang. No dinner invitations, no family updates, no messages from James. The silence had a weight to it, but I'd learned to live with silence. I'd lived with it since the day Robert's heart stopped and the laughter in this house disappeared with him. Now, silence wasn't loneliness, it was proof that I'd stopped chasing people who didn't want to understand me. On Wednesday morning, Henry called. Mrs. Eldridge, he said, just wanted to let you know, Clara showed up to her new position. The kitchen staff didn't believe it at first. I couldn't help but smile. Did she behave? He chuckled. She did, mostly. I think the apron humbled her faster than we expected. I didn't laugh out loud, but something inside me felt lighter. Not from revenge, but from balance. There's a difference. Before we hung up, Henry added softly, everyone at the office says the company feels different, more human again. That meant more to me than any apology could. That afternoon, I went through Robert's old paperwork, the original contracts, the handwritten letters from clients who had become lifelong friends. Each signature, each note reminded me why we started the company in the first place. It was never just about business. It was about dignity. Robert used to say, we don't build things for money, Myrtle, we build them so no one can make us feel small. He was right. Money fades, but dignity, that's what people remember when you're gone. I closed the file and sat back, feeling the soft hum of the house around me. For the first time in years, I felt Robert's presence not as a ghost, but as a partner, quiet, approving. On Thursday evening, I got a message from my granddaughter, Emily, James and Clara's oldest. Her text was short, Grandma, can I visit? I didn't hesitate. Of course, sweetheart, anytime. When she arrived, she looked uncertain, 16, all long hair and anxious eyes. She sat on the couch, twisting the strap of her backpack. Dad and Mom are fighting, she said finally. Mom's angry all the time. Dad keeps saying you ruined everything. I sighed softly. Do you think I did? She shook her head. No, I saw the video. I blinked. What video? She pulled out her phone and showed me. Someone at the office had recorded Clara yelling in the kitchen, refusing to wear the uniform. It had gone around the staff group chat. Emily looked embarrassed. I know it's not nice to laugh. But I did. I guess it's the first time she looked real. I didn't scold her. I just smiled gently. People show who they are when they lose what they never earned. She nodded. Quiet. We talked for over an hour. Not about Clara, not about business. We talked about college, art, music, how she missed her grandfather's stories. Before she left, she hugged me tight, the kind of hug that feels like both an apology and a promise. When the door closed, I stayed there for a moment, looking at the empty hallway. For years, I'd wanted my family to come back to this house. I'd imagined big dinners, laughter, togetherness. But now, I realized, I didn't need everyone back. Just one honest connection was enough to make the place feel like home again. That night, I made tea and sat by the porch. The air smelled of rain and pine. The wind carried faint sounds from the town, car horns, a dog barking, a train passing somewhere far away. I looked up at the stars and whispered, "We did it, Robert." Not we won. Just we did it. Because survival, at my age, isn't about winning over others. It's about winning back yourself. On Friday, a letter arrived. Plain white envelope, James's handwriting. Inside, just a few words. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't see what she was doing. Maybe I didn't want to. I'll call soon. I placed the letter on the mantel beside Robert's photo. Not forgiveness yet, but maybe a beginning. As the sun set, the house filled with orange light. I thought about everything that had happened, the dinner, the insult, the quiet revenge. It all started with 6 words. Get this pauper away from the table. Funny how words meant to belittle someone can end up defining the speaker instead. I smiled, slow and calm. Because now, every time Clara set a plate in that company kitchen, she'd remember the table she told me I didn't deserve to sit at. And I'd remember that I didn't need their table. I built my own. The morning after I read James's letter, I woke up before sunrise. The sky was still gray, that soft color between night and day when the world hasn't quite decided what it wants to be. I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the first light spill across the yard. The garden looked tired from last night's rain, petals heavy with dew, but still standing. I smiled. Resilience isn't loud, it just grows back quietly. I thought about James's words, I'll call soon. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. But for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to wait by the phone. Because waiting, I realized, had been my second job for most of my life. Waiting for kindness. Waiting for respect. Waiting for someone to see me. That chapter was over. Around mid-morning, I drove back to Eldridge & Company for a meeting with the board. It had been a week since the reassignment, and I knew there would be whispers. When I walked into the building, the same receptionist looked up, and this time, she smiled. Good morning, Mrs. Eldridge, they're expecting you. The elevator ride felt shorter. Or maybe I'd just grown lighter. Inside the conference room, a dozen faces turned toward me, men and women I'd known for decades. Some nervous, some proud. Henry stood near the head of the table. Everything's in order, ma'am. Clara signed the reassignment acknowledgement yesterday. I nodded. Good. Keep her on for 3 months. Let her learn what real work feels like. Someone chuckled, but I didn't. This wasn't about humiliation anymore. It was about grounding. After that, I continued, she can decide whether to resign or rebuild herself. Either way, she'll earn it this time. Henry smiled faintly. You're fair, Mrs. Eldridge. Fairness is all I ever asked for, I said. When the meeting ended, I stayed behind for a moment, alone in the quiet boardroom. The long glass windows looked out over Dallas, tall buildings, moving cars, small people with big dreams. Robert used to stand in this very spot and say, every empire needs a compass. Myrtle, without integrity, it turns into chaos. He was right. And for a while, I'd lost my compass trying to keep the peace. But now, I'd found it again. I closed the folder in front of me, straightened the chair, and turned off the lights. Outside, as I passed the kitchen, I caught a glimpse through the small window in the door. Clara stood there, hair pulled back, wearing a plain uniform, wiping down counters. Her movements were slow, methodical, tired. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But pity is just another way of carrying someone's lesson for them. And this one wasn't mine to carry. She looked up and saw me. Our eyes met. No words, no shouting. Just the silence of two women who finally understood where they stood. I gave a small nod, not of victory, but of closure, and walked away. That evening, I drove out to the lake, the same one where Robert and I used to take James fishing when he was little. The water shimmered in the fading light, calm and endless. I sat on the old wooden bench, its paint peeling, and let the wind play with my hair. I thought about all the things I'd lost and all the things I'd finally reclaimed. Dignity. Voice. Peace. Funny how the things you fight hardest for are the ones that were yours all along. You just forget to protect them. A family nearby was setting up for a picnic, kids laughing. A man carrying a cooler. A woman spreading a blanket. I watched them for a while. It didn't hurt like it used to. Seeing happiness didn't feel like salt in an open wound anymore. It just reminded me that love, in its real form, is still out there, even if not always under your own roof. I picked up a small pebble and tossed it into the lake. The ripples spread out slowly, touching everything in their path. That's how I wanted to leave this world, quietly, but reaching far. When I got home, the phone was ringing. I hesitated before answering. Mom? James's voice. Yes, sweetheart. He paused. I came by the office today. Henry told me what happened. I didn't realize how much we'd taken from you. I know, I said softly, but now you do. I'm sorry, he whispered. Clara's changing. I think this opened her eyes. I hope so, I said. People see themselves clearer when the mirror isn't kind. He exhaled, the sound of relief and regret tangled together. Can we come by for dinner this weekend? The kids miss you. I smiled. Of course, bring them, and come hungry. I'm making Robert's roast. After we hung up, I sat in the same chair by the window where I'd started the week. The garden outside glowed under the porch light. I could almost hear Robert's voice again, teasing, "Took you long enough, Myrtle." I laughed quietly. You always said I was patient. Then I lifted my teacup, looked toward the stars, and said, to patience, and to payback, the quiet kind. The wind brushed against the house, gentle and approving. And for the first time in years, I knew, the story was finally turning into peace. By Saturday afternoon, the house smelled like rosemary and roasted beef. I hadn't cooked for a crowd in years, but the motions came back to me like old music. The clatter of pans, the warmth of the oven, the quiet rhythm of chopping carrots, it all felt like memory meeting muscle. I set the dining table myself. The good china, the linen napkins, the silverware Robert insisted we buy even when money was tight. He used to say, if you treat every meal like it matters, one day, it will. That day had finally come back around. The doorbell rang at 6. When I opened the door, there they were, James, looking older than I remembered, Emily, carrying flowers, and the two younger boys, holding a pie that was clearly store-bought but proudly presented. Behind them, just a few steps back, stood Clara. No designer dress this time. Just jeans, a plain blouse, hair tied back neatly. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Emily ran forward and hugged me. Grandma, it smells amazing. Her brothers followed, chattering about school and football and things that made the house sound alive again. James gave me an awkward smile. Can we come in? Of course, I said softly, stepping aside. Dinner started quietly. The children filled the silence with their laughter. Which was good. Laughter heals spaces that adults don't know how to fix. I carved the roast, poured gravy, passed the bread. For a while, it almost felt like before the company, before the words, before the distance. Halfway through the meal, Clara finally spoke. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice low, "for not firing me." I looked up. "You're welcome." She took a breath. At first, I hated it, the kitchen, the noise, the smell of soap that wouldn't wash off my hands. But then I started listening. To people I'd never noticed before. To how hard they work. Her eyes met mine. I thought power was control. Turns out, it's responsibility. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then I nodded. That's something most people never learn. James cleared his throat. "Mom, I owe you an apology too. For not standing up that night." "I know," I said gently, "and I know why you didn't. You wanted peace." He looked down. I thought silence was safer. "It never is," I said. "It just lets the wrong people speak louder." He nodded slowly, and the room fell quiet again, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. After dinner, the kids helped clear the table while Clara stayed behind, drying the dishes. I could feel her glancing at me now and then, as if waiting for permission to speak again. Finally, she said, "You were right about the table." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh? You said I didn't belong there that night," she murmured, "and you were right, not because of who I was, but because of how I acted. I forgot what it meant to earn a seat." I folded the towel in my hands. The table was never about wealth, Clara. It was about gratitude, about knowing who helped build it. She nodded, eyes wet. "I see that now. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. Some truths don't need an embrace, they just need to be spoken." When everyone left, the house was quiet again, but in a different way this time. Not empty. Just peaceful. I walked to the dining room, looked at the table. The candles burned low, plates stacked neatly, crumbs of laughter still in the air. For years, that table had been a place of disappointment. Tonight, it felt redeemed. I sat down in my chair and traced the grain of the wood with my fingers. "So this is what full circle feels like," I whispered. Later that night, I stood on the porch. The moon high and clear. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, soft, steady, like a heartbeat. I thought about everything that had led here. The humiliation. The silence. The decision to stand up, not by shouting, but by remembering my worth. Robert used to say, "Revenge fades, but respect stays." He was right again. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about respect, and the quiet kind of justice that doesn't need to be loud to last. Inside, I turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow of the lamp by Robert's photo. The frame caught the light just right, almost like he was smiling. I whispered, "You'd be proud of us, old man." Then I took one last look at the table, finally full, finally peaceful, and smiled. Because sometimes, life brings you back to the same place, but lets you sit there stronger. The next morning, the house still carried the scent of rosemary and baked bread. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window, soft and golden, settling over the dishes I hadn't yet washed. It felt strange, this quiet after warmth. For the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt, it rested. I stood by the sink, holding one of the dinner plates, tracing the faint scratches that told stories of every meal before this one. Each line was a memory: birthdays, arguments, anniversaries, losses. Life, written in porcelain. I washed the last dish, dried my hands, and made myself coffee, strong, black, just the way Robert liked it. Old habits never really fade, they just wait for the right morning to return. Around noon, Emily came back. No text, no call, just a knock on the door and that same uncertain smile. "Grandma, do you still have the photo albums?" she asked. "I do," I said. "Why?" "I want to see what the company looked like before." We sat together on the living room floor. Albums spread open like chapters of a story. In one picture, Robert stood beside a truck with the company's first logo painted by hand. In another, James was a teenager sweeping the warehouse floor, beaming with pride. Emily pointed to the photo. "Dad looks so happy here." "He was," I said softly, "back when he worked for something he believed in." She turned another page and frowned. "You're in all of these. But you're not in the ones after I was born." I smiled. That's what happens when people decide your part of the story is over. They stop taking pictures. She looked at me with those clear young eyes, the kind that still believe in fairness. "I think that's wrong," she said. "You built everything." Her words were simple, but they filled the room like sunlight. Later that afternoon, I drove her to the company. Not for business, for perspective. When we walked through the lobby, people greeted me with respect that used to make me uncomfortable. Now, it just felt appropriate. Clara wasn't in the kitchen this time. She was in the HR office, sorting paperwork. She looked up when we passed, her face calm, almost peaceful. "Afternoon, Mrs. Eldridge," she said. I nodded. "Afternoon, Clara." There was no bitterness in her tone, no sarcasm in mine. Just acknowledgement, the quiet kind that comes after lessons sink deep. Emily whispered, "She seems different." "She is," I said. "Hard work has a way of washing the pride off a person." We toured the building, the production floor, the break room, the office I used to share with Robert. Dust had gathered on his old nameplate, but the words still gleamed. "Integrity builds empires." Emily traced the letters with her finger. "Grandpa really said that?" "Every day," I replied. "He used to tell me, if you lose integrity, it doesn't matter how big the empire gets. It'll collapse from the inside." She smiled faintly. "Then I guess you saved it." "Maybe," I said, looking around, "or maybe I just reminded people who built it in the first place." That evening, after I dropped Emily home, I stopped by the cemetery. It wasn't planned, my car just seemed to turn that way. Robert's headstone sat beneath an old oak tree, the marble cool under my hand. Someone, maybe one of the kids, had left fresh flowers there. "Guess what?" I said quietly. "We had dinner. Real dinner. Laughter and everything." The wind stirred the leaves. Soft and steady. "I think you'd like how it ended," I continued. "No shouting. No revenge. Just clarity." I sat there for a while, telling him about Clara's change, about James's apology, about Emily's curiosity. Talking to the dead isn't crazy when you've spent most of your life loving someone who listens better than the living. The sky began to fade into gold and lavender. I stood, brushed the dust off my skirt, and smiled. "Don't worry," I whispered, "the company's in good hands again. So is the family." On the drive home, the radio played one of Robert's favorite songs, an old tune from the 70s. I didn't turn it off. I let it fill the car, the notes blurring into the sound of the road beneath the tires. When I reached the house, the porch light came on automatically. That small, steady glow felt like a welcome, like home saying, "You've done enough for today." I poured myself tea and sat by the window. The reflection staring back wasn't the same woman who'd been called a pauper. That woman had been tired, fragile, waiting for kindness from people who didn't know what kindness was. The one in the glass now, she didn't wait. She chose. They say time heals everything. I don't think that's true. Time doesn't heal, it teaches. And once you learn enough, you realize healing isn't forgetting what hurt you. It's remembering it without losing yourself again. I took one last sip of tea, set the cup down, and whispered, to Robert, to myself, maybe to anyone who'd ever felt invisible. They can take your seat, your title, even your picture off the wall. But they can't take your story, not if you keep telling it. The clock ticked softly in the background, steady as a heartbeat. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt truly at peace. A week passed after that visit to Robert's grave. Life settled into something calm. Predictable, even. And for the first time, that didn't feel empty, it felt earned. Each morning, I woke with the same quiet routine: coffee, garden, A slow walk to the mailbox. The world didn't look any different. But I did. It's strange how the same street can feel new once you stop walking with your head down. The neighbors waved again. The woman next door, Mrs. Henson, dropped off a pie, just because. People noticed me, not because of what I'd done, but because I carried myself like someone who remembered her worth. On Thursday, I received a call from the company. It was Clara. "Mrs. Eldridge," she said, formal but steady, "I wanted to let you know I've decided to resign." Her tone was calm, not bitter. "I've been offered a position at a nonprofit," she continued. "They help women re-enter the workforce. I think it's time I did something meaningful." For a moment, I said nothing. Then, softly, "That sounds like a good place to start again." She hesitated. "I wanted to thank you for holding me accountable, for not letting me stay the person I was." "Clara," I said, "we all get humbled one way or another. You just happened to get yours with a uniform and a mop. The important part is what you do after." She gave a small laugh. "Fair enough." When we hung up, I sat back in my chair and exhaled slowly. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was relief. Like the story had found its natural ending. That afternoon, I took out a clean journal, not the one with grocery lists or family notes, but a new one. On the first page, I wrote, "The Eldridge Table." It wasn't meant to be a business plan, or a memoir. Just a record, of what we built, what we lost, and what we found again. I wrote about the early days, Robert fixing the truck engine at midnight, me calculating payroll by hand, James sweeping floors before school. I wrote about the dinners that used to bring everyone together. And yes, I wrote about the one that tore us apart. But most importantly, I wrote about what came after. The silence, the rediscovery, the lesson. I wanted the story to live somewhere other than memory, so that one day, when I was gone, Emily could read it and understand that strength doesn't always look loud. Later that week, James stopped by again. He looked tired, the kind of tired that comes after finally admitting to yourself that you've been wrong. We sat on the porch, drinking lemonade. No speeches this time, no rehearsed apologies. Just small talk that meant more than words. After a while, he said, "Mom, Clara told me she spoke with you. I think she really means to change." "I believe she does," I replied. "She had to fall hard enough to feel the ground." He nodded. "I'm sorry it took all this to open my eyes." "It's all right," I said. "Growth is rarely gentle." We sat in silence for a long time, watching the sunset stretch across the neighborhood. The sky turned orange, then gold, then that soft gray that makes everything look honest. As the first stars appeared, James leaned back in his chair. "Do you ever regret stepping away from the company when you did?" I smiled faintly. "No, if I hadn't, you'd never have learned how fragile success can be. And I'd never have learned how strong I still was." He looked at me, really looked, and said quietly, "Dad would have been proud of you." "I think he is," I said, "but I'm more interested in being proud of myself." He laughed softly. "You've earned that." When he left, I stayed on the porch a little longer. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of cut grass and jasmine. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed, deep, low, familiar. I thought about how everything had come full circle. The humiliation, the silence, the power shift, the peace. It wasn't a perfect story, but it was mine. And that, I realized, was enough. Before going inside, I took one last look at the sky. The stars above Texas were scattered and quiet, not bright like city lights, but steady. That's what I wanted to be remembered for. Not brilliance, not noise. Just steadiness. The kind that keeps a family, a company, and a legacy from collapsing, even when storms come. I whispered into the night. When they tell this story, I hope they don't remember the insult or the revenge. I hope they remember that an old woman stood tall again, and stayed that way. The wind moved through the trees like a soft applause. And I smiled, closing the door behind me. Because sometimes, the loudest ending is simply peace. It's funny how peace sneaks up on you. It doesn't come with trumpets or big moments. It just settles, like dust on sunlight, soft and steady, until one day you realize it's been there all along. That was how my days started to feel. Slow mornings, tea by the porch, the cat curling near my feet. Sometimes, I'd hear the distant sound of traffic from town, but it no longer made me restless. Life didn't feel small anymore. It felt right-sized. The company kept running smoothly under Henry's supervision. Every few days, he'd call to give me updates, always ending with the same words. Mr. Robert would be proud. And maybe he would. But what mattered more was that the people working there were proud again too. That place finally had air, not fear, not pretense, just steady purpose. Clara's resignation had gone quietly through the staff bulletin. No gossip, no drama. Just one short line. We thank her for her service and wish her well. A clean ending, the kind every story hopes for. One Friday morning, I visited the community center downtown. They were hosting a small event for local business owners, mentoring young women starting over. When I walked in, I saw Clara at the far end of the room, speaking to a small group. She looked different. Lighter somehow. No diamonds, no mask, just clarity in her eyes. When she spotted me, she smiled, a real one this time. After her talk, she walked over. I didn't expect to see you here. I heard they were looking for old women with stories, I said with a small grin. She laughed. You have a few. We sat for a while. She told me about her new job, long hours, smaller paychecks, but real meaning. She said helping women who'd been overlooked made her see herself differently. I used to think power was something you held over people, she said. Now I think it's something you hand down. I nodded. That's the only kind that lasts. When we parted, she hugged me. It wasn't an apology. It was recognition. And that was enough. That evening, back home, I found a small envelope in the mailbox. Inside was a simple note from the company board. In honor of your leadership and integrity, we've renamed the Employee Scholarship Program the Myrtle and Robert Eldridge Foundation for Work and Dignity. I read it twice, then set it on the table beside Robert's photo. He'd have teased me. They should have put your name first, Myrtle. But I could almost hear his laugh in the silence. That weekend, the family came over again. Emily helped me bake, the boys played outside, and James fixed the loose hinge on the back door, a small task. But the kind of thing that says, I'm home again. We ate on the porch as the sky turned golden. No speeches, no heavy talk, just warmth. When the boys finished their pie, Emily leaned on my shoulder. Grandma, she said, when I grow up, I want to build something like you did. I smiled. Then build it with kindness. It lasts longer. She thought for a moment. What if people take advantage of it? Then you remind them, I said, that kindness isn't weakness. It's a choice, and choices have consequences. She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. After they left, I sat alone with the soft hum of crickets outside. The house was quiet again. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It was full, filled with echoes of laughter. The smell of pie, the memory of what forgiveness actually feels like. I looked around the room, at the table that once hosted humiliation. Now covered in crumbs of joy. At the photo wall where everyone belonged again. Even the ones who had left. I thought of all the versions of myself that had sat in this house. The wife, the widow, the mother, the woman called pauper. And now, finally, the survivor who didn't need to be loud to be seen. Before bed, I stood by the window, the moon lighting the garden silver. The wind rustled through the trees, soft as breath. I whispered, more to the night than anyone. I didn't rebuild an empire. I just rebuilt myself. And that's more than enough. The clock ticked on, steady and kind. Peace didn't feel like surrender anymore. It felt like wisdom. That's the thing no one tells you about getting older. You don't stop caring, you just stop chasing. You learn that strength isn't always about speaking up. Sometimes it's about knowing when silence says everything. And when I finally turned off the lights that night, I realized the greatest revenge of all wasn't making anyone suffer. It was proving, quietly, gracefully, that I was never the pauper they said I was. I was the foundation. And foundations don't crumble. They endure. The morning after the family dinner, I woke before the sun. The house was still, filled with the faint smell of cinnamon from last night's pie. For the first time in years, I didn't wake with that heavy ache in my chest, the one that came from remembering too much. Instead, I just lay there, listening. To the quiet hum of the refrigerator. To the birds beginning their day. To the sound of my own breath, steady, calm, alive. That kind of peace doesn't arrive all at once. It sneaks in, like dawn light through half-closed curtains. Soft, patient, sure. I made coffee and carried it out to the porch. The air was cool, the sky pale blue with streaks of gold. Across the street, Mr. and Mrs. Henson were already watering their lawn. They waved. I waved back. It felt simple, almost ordinary, but after everything that had happened, ordinary was something sacred. When I sat down, I noticed the letter still sitting on the porch table, the one from the Scholarship Foundation. I opened it again, just to see the names printed there. The Myrtle and Robert Eldridge Foundation for Work and Dignity. Work and dignity. Those two words had built my entire life. And now, they'd outlive me. I smiled and whispered, "You see that, Robert? They finally got it right." Later that week, I visited the foundation office downtown. The sign was new, but the smell of polished wood and fresh paint reminded me of the first days of Eldridge and Company. A young woman greeted me at the door. "Mrs. Eldridge, thank you for coming. We've set up the first mentoring session for next month." She led me to a small room lined with photographs of women, each one with eyes full of hope. Stories written in the lines of their faces. Single mothers, retired nurses, women starting businesses from scratch. I looked at them and felt something stir, a quiet pride that had nothing to do with money. I asked, "Do they know who started the program?" She smiled. "Not yet, we thought you might want to tell them yourself." I laughed softly. "Maybe one day. For now, let them just feel seen." Because that was all I'd ever wanted, for women like me. Women who'd been overlooked, dismissed, or called too old to remember that their stories still mattered. That night, I sat at my desk with my journal again. The pages were nearly full now, every chapter of this strange, beautiful mess of a journey. At the top of the new page, I wrote, Lesson 11, The Quiet Kind of Power. Then I wrote, Power isn't the loudest voice in the room. It's the calm one that doesn't need to shout. I paused, smiling at how simple it looked in ink. Sometimes, the deepest truths fit into the smallest sentences. On Saturday, James came by alone. He didn't call first, he never did when something was weighing on him. "Hey, Mom," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "You busy?" "Just writing," I said. "Come in." He followed me to the porch, hands in his pockets. After a long silence, he said, "I've been thinking about Dad, about what he'd say if he saw all this." I looked at him. "What do you think he'd say?" James shrugged, then smiled faintly. "He'd probably tell me to stop letting other people do my thinking for me." I laughed. "He'd be right." Then he looked serious again. "You know, Mom, for years I thought strength meant keeping everyone happy. But you showed me it means standing still when no one else will." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "It took me 71 years to learn that. You learned it sooner. That's what matters." He nodded, eyes shining just a little. "You're something else, Mom." "I know," I said, half joking. "Took you long enough to notice." We both laughed, real, unguarded laughter that sounded like forgiveness. When he left, I stayed on the porch a while longer. The sky turned soft pink, and the wind carried the smell of rain again. I thought of Clara, working at her new nonprofit. I thought of Emily, planning to study business and art. I thought of Robert, whose lessons still echoed through every part of my life. For the first time, I realized I didn't need to hold on so tightly anymore. The weight was gone. The lesson had been passed on. As night fell, I walked inside and turned off the porch light. The reflection in the glass door caught me, the same face. The same silver hair, but something lighter behind the eyes. Maybe that's what peace really looks like, not the absence of pain, but the absence of pretending. I whispered to the reflection. They called me a pauper once. But the richest thing I ever owned was my own voice. The clock ticked softly. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, not angry, just distant, like a reminder that storms don't last forever. I smiled, and I don't hide from them anymore. Then I turned off the lights. The house wrapped in quiet. And thought, this must be what freedom sounds like.